We are live.
Hello, hello.
Just gonna move some cards around while people show up.
Sounds good. As we let me tweet out your.
Yeah, gotta notify the socials.
All right, should be good to go now.
All right, cool.
Hopefully,
I see a
as we
notification. Perfect.
let
Retweeted.
chat trickle in here.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about Trailblazers Torch.
Me too. I expected it to be really embarrassing right away, and I'm kind of surprised. Not to spoil too much about the success people have been having with it.
Yeah, it is surprisingly not nearly as bad as it looks because it looks awful.
It truly does look like 4 mana for a blank piece of cardboard.
There is no text box on that card
No.
besides take the initiative. Luckily, they made it an equipment, despite not having any equip cost or abilities.
Hey, Oathbreakers, you did not miss anything. I've been
We're
live
literally
for
just starting.
about 1 minute so far. Can anybody let me know how our esteemed guest xJCloud sounds on the stream? It's the first time I've actually had my desktop audio on, so I got to make sure the levels look right.
Yeah. If I'm too quiet, if I need to get closer to the mic, stuff like that.
Sound great. Thank you. Good to hear.
Perfect.
Nailed it. Sounds pretty balanced, just like the deck that we play. What do you know?
I missed the brick mana curve. I think it was back in the pre-Modern Horizons 2 days where it was like actual identical numbers of ones, twos, and threes.
Yeah, I do miss that.
Important question. Okay, I went into our Discord after, and a bunch of people agreed with me about saying Laron the normal way, not Lauren. I'm not alone.
I'll acknowledge that you're not alone. I'm gonna still say Lauren. I'm
There
sorry.
were
We'll have to fight
multiple
about
other
this one.
members of chat that were saying Laron. I'll take this poll to Twitter if I have to. I will lose the poll in Twitter, but I will take it to Twitter.
I will make sure my voice is heard. I will not be supporting in Yori on this league now. Thank you for asking, though.
I think everyone agrees on split planes. Everyone besides isolated system, at least.
Yeah, I did. I did respect artistic intent here and put in his snow-covered planes, but I made sure to not own any of them so that the yellow bars are there. So
that is very good. I actually do own a bunch of snow-covered planes because back when I was streaming more, it was a bit that every December I would swap all of my planes for snow-covered planes to get in the holiday spirit.
okay, yeah. I honestly laughed when I searched for snow-covered planes and
Realized that you didn't own any.
straight none. I figured I would have one from like opening chests or something, or like some random draft I did of a set that had had the snow-covered planes, but
There's never a consideration to split your planes. Don't listen to anyone except me and people that agree with me.
I'll put it this way: is it literally correct? Yeah, sure, I guess, but no, I'm not going to. And I will take any loss that I get because I didn't split my plans with pride.
Doing like doing the mental exercises of figuring out splitting your planes and what, when, and why it's correct is just not. It's not worth the mental energy. Do literally anything else with your time, and you will win more matches.
Yeah.
Speaking as someone who has on stream lost a game and match to Reed Duke on Miracles in a challenge because maybe not because, but in that game he did predict me naming planes hit and drew 2 cards. I'll still never do it.
If they print a cranial extraction that lets us name basics, I think that there are more concerning things happening in the game than whether or not we're splitting planes and snow-covered planes.
Yeah, cranial extracting basics seems a little bit concerning.
How's it going, everybody? Still giving people a few minutes to to hop into the chat.
Darth Dog wants us to cut the torch. I have news for you.
We got some things to say about Torch. I mean, I haven't actually had the chance to play yet. If the league that I will probably play after we talk will be the first time that I've played with Torch in my deck, but I was gonna try it out anyway, so
I still don't have a firm opinion on it. It's definitely in the position of I'll try this versus my initial thought, which was this is garbage. Why would I ever put this in my deck?
yeah.
We got 2 5-0s on record already with Torch in the deck, from one from Luna, one from Isolated System.
Yeah. We will talk about the main deck and Containment Priest in a bit. I don't want to spoil too much about the list because we're going to be talking about a lot of things in this list for the first little bit of this stream. So, I've got a script and everything.
We have a script? I don't have a script.
I have structure, if nothing else. We'll give it one more minute, and then we'll do it. We'll make it happen. All right, let's get into it. So, welcome everybody to the second annual.
Definitely not annual.
Definitely not annual, but it is the second, or is it the third?
It is the second, yes.
Okay.
I've only done one of these with Luinil, I think like 2 years ago. I'm not 100% sure.
I thought it was about this time last year, actually. That's why I thought annual. Because it was after you guys had discovered the Red Splash.
That is true.
Which must have been like in 2022, but right before Neo, when you started getting into Moonstompy.
I don't make a lot of YouTube videos, so I could probably find the post.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome to the State of the D&T Union address. I am your host, Akaleth, joined by the esteemed xJCloud.
Hello, hello. It was actually exactly 13 months ago, February 9th, 2022.
I'm a genius. Nice. So yeah, this was originally came up as an idea for an incentive on your donation stream, and those goals ended up getting blown out of the water. And on top of that, we scheduled it, and then a banned and restricted announcement happened like the next week, and the timing there is pretty hilarious and kind of couldn't be better in some ways.
This almost happened like 9 days ago, last Tuesday instead.
Yeah, that would have
It
been
just
a little embarrassing.
yes, here's everything we think about D&T and its position in the meta, and then 6 days later, well, the meta doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Um. So I think before we get into too much, let's I'm gonna give like a very quick overview of what I think we would have talked about last week if this happened last week. Um, because I think what was interesting about DNT is that like there was, I think it was actually like secretly quite good in the meta. It just kind of like it was sort of overlooked because like initiative was like the clearly more broken white deck. Um, and I think like there's a lot of like subtle things about the meta that I think actually like made D&T look a lot better than I think people would have expected. I know you were playing like a little bit before the ban came down this Monday. How did you feel about it and like the little bit of experience you had before the update came out?
So for the entirety of Initiative's existence, I am a grand total of 10-0 with Death and Taxes because I played 2 leagues at the very end, right before the ban. So the deck was actually completely perfect and actually the secret best deck in the meta. But less jokingly, I do think that it was very underrated. I I really don't want to like toot my own horn about this or anything, but it does feel like oftentimes whenever me and also Lunal stop playing D&T, the deck kind of just drops off the face of the earth for a while. There's like three other notable D&T players that like come to mind when you're thinking about like big challenge results. You have
Mm.
obviously like Isolated System, Yoshiwada. You don't play a lot of challenges, but like obviously you're also a big name when it comes to D&T at this point. And there's like Shiromuni, I know plays D&T sometimes, but those are like
Yeah. That was the other name I was like trying to think of but couldn't. Yeah.
yeah, like if those people aren't playing D&T, and almost none of them were, except for Yoshiwada, that's why it stopped showing up in challenges. And Yoshiwada kept showing up in challenges. He won one of them.
Yeah, I noticed. I think there was like 3 weekend challenges that he had like at least like top 16 like in a row. Um,
Yeah.
and interestingly, like with like a in the grand scheme of how different DNT builds can be, like pretty different from the one that I was playing because he was trying touch the spirit realm when I was playing with ephemerate.
Mm-hmm. There was a brief stint with him playing Warsaw Pontiff and Cavern Souls that we won't talk about.
Yeah, we will not. No, we will not get into that one. Um,
Respect your man bases, kids.
yeah. Anyway, that's what we would have talked about a week ago. And thankfully, we're here now and don't have to talk about any of that anymore because everything is completely different. Um, so the first thing I think we're going to talk about is sort of like what a few of our lists look like as like entries into the new meta. Um, I'm going to kind of start with mine. I will have to again admit I haven't actually played yet. I haven't had haven't had the chance to. Though I will certainly after we have this discussion. I think the first thing that you'll probably notice here is that the ephemerates that I've been playing with for a long time are now gone. Um, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think like right now I definitely don't want to be playing. I mostly want to be playing like a very stock list, because I think one thing you can kind of get trapped into as D&T in an unknown meta is kind of like pre-solving for the wrong problems because you don't know what those problems are going to be yet. So I just cut the 3 ephemerates. The cards that I put in for them, or I started with the Timeless Dragon to sort of like go back up to that like 33 and a half land in the deck, since ephemerate kind of let you cheat on mana a little bit. I also added this main deck Containment Priest that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and I also added this main deck Trailblazer's Torch, which I think we will both kind of have different things to say about it. The only other thing, the sideboard here is not super crazy. The only major odd decision I'm making here is I don't really feel like pretending like Storm exists right now. So I just decided to cut the Mindbreak traps and play more stuff um, for the fair decks, and also notably, since we'll kind of get to the matchups in a bit, but since I think since I think Delver is likely to still be a pretty major player in the meta, notably every version of Delver I can imagine is pretty weak to Rest in Peace still. Um, so that's kind of why I wanted to go up to a second here. I'm gonna ship it over to your list and let you talk a bit about what your choices are so far. I know you've been able to play more than I have, certainly. So I'll open the floor to you to talk about the ways in which your list is different from mine.
I think our lists are almost identical. As far as main decks go, it's Ghost Quarter versus Field of Ruin. It's Timeless Dragon versus Sanctum Prelate, and other than that, they're the same, I think.
Yes. Yeah, you have a Sanctum Prelate. I have the Timeless Dragon. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, so there's been a bunch of results with Field of Ruin and Cavern of Souls. I know Lunel's list that he 5-0'd with recently. We had Cavern of Souls, Isolated System 5-0'd with Field of Ruins. I've been a little bit partial to Ghost Quarter. I haven't really done anything with them, though, and I'm not confident in any of these lands. I think they're all, like, you can make arguments for all of them, and they're all, like, kind of fine. I'm not at all married to any of them. I do think that it's probably worth it to play some sort of flex land. Basics are good, but there are a lot of angles that Ghost Quarter covers, Field of Ruin covers, Cavern of Souls covers. I have very low confidence in which one is correct, but I think they're all acceptable to play in small quantities.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. My stance is that I don't love any of them. And the reason that I play Field of Ruin is that it's the closest to just playing more planes, which is kind of what I tend to lean towards when I'm like unsure of what kind of lands I want to play.
That makes sense, and that's why they were originally in the list too. It's just I want this extra like Wasteland effect against Urza Saga, some other utility lands, but this deck really loves to not lose land drops. You play the Wasteland because it's very, very good at what it does. But if you can not afford to not sacrifice the rest of your lands, then you're usually in a pretty good spot.
Yep.
The Sanctum Prelate was something I was just like kind of curious to try out. I'm not super excited to play it. I think it has aged pretty poorly. In terms of being a hate card, 3 mana is a lot for a lot of matchups. There's a chance lands could come back in a little bit, which Sanctum Prelate does help, but Torch also helps in that regard. It gets a little bit better against Delver now that they can't just cast expressive iterations through it, but I'm still like not super hyped to have it in my deck versus Delver. The biggest issue with it was like, oh, I'm gonna play this card and then my opponent's gonna cast Murkhead Regent, and now half of my removal for it is turned off.
Yep. As soon as you cast Prelate on one, you will draw a Source Splashers. That's just how the game works.
Yeah, for sure. And there are a lot of situations where I'm like not super interested in casting a Prelate into possible Murktide unless I already have it backed up with Solitude, or even like I won't put it on 1. I'll try to put it on like 2 to play around like Abrades when that was a thing, or like 5 to make sure my Solitude resolves through like a Force of Will, rather than trying to like lock out a bunch of their deck. As good as it seems in theory, but hey, cat, get out of here! You're not welcome here.
I heard that, cat. I was wondering if they were going to get into trouble.
Anyway, Prelate was definitely just a thing that I wanted to try out because I did think it got better. Whether or not it's playable, I'm unsure about.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I was leaning away from it just because I felt like I'd spent so long playing Prelate, longer than I think it deserved, which is not like a great reason not to try it again. Just like I don't know. I think I'm pretty sick of the card. I agree that if lands comes back in a big way, it's probably the best. It's probably the best single card we could add, other than the Torch that we already have. But yeah. So someone was already asking about the main deck Containment Priest, and I'll give my feelings on it, and let me know if this kind of like rings true to you as well. I think there's a couple different reasons that I'm kind of interested in this in the main deck. One is that at least before the ban, most of the combo decks usually involved creatures, and they also usually involved ways in which you could kind of cheat creatures into play one way or another. Sometimes it was Painter, like welding things in. It could have been Reanimator reanimating things. It could have been Breakfast trying to Dread Return, Thassa's Oracle, anything like that. And I don't really see those decks really going away at all. Um, and I was kind of interested in a 2-drop. I had like previously been playing like the second Sash for a while, particularly when 4-color was a big deck, because I think Sash was just like incredibly good against that deck. But I think Priest is like a little bit faster and a little bit more versatile, and that's kind of why I'm trying it out right now.
Yeah, so I was interested in trying out Priest in the main deck during the initiative meta because, in addition to all the matchups you were talking about, it is also good against initiative. Some games you will fall behind, and being able to try to counter a throne trigger is really important.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to like potentially countering a Touch the Spirit Realm Flicker, obviously it weaponizes their touches against your creatures, but you have wisps, exchange, blah blah blah. It did drop off a little bit in interest for me. In the post ban meta, I still ended up playing one, but I think that slot, as you mentioned, is just kind of a generic Hateberry graveyard slot. The 3 cards I was interested in were Containment Priest, Second Lion Sash, or the Remorseful Cleric.
Mm-hmm.
And they all kind of have different upsides. I think Priest has the most upside outside of being the stone worst against Delver. If Delver's a good enough matchup, which I think it probably is, then maybe you can just get away with the Priest, because I think it's likely the best in a lot of other matchups.
Yeah, I think I made that evaluation kind of the same. I suspect that we're going to be good enough against Delver that it's okay if the 2-drop sucks against them.
Yeah. Remorseful Cleric is probably the worst overall, but the best against Delver, and then Sash is probably just kind of a middle groundy card.
Mm-hmm.
There are some matchups where I think Sash is like going to end up being better than Priest, but Sash has the problem of not really being a 2-drop in terms of having an impact in the matchups you want the effect on turn 2.
Yes, yeah. Cleric is good for the combo decks. I think it's worth noting that for any deck where Cleric, for any combo deck that Cleric is good against, Priest kind of does the same thing with the but it has flash, so you can like actually like blow them out with it, as opposed to Remorseful Cleric. You have to play and then they have a chance to like play around it, dig for removal, things like that. Sometimes you'll just like cast a Containment Priest into their spell that cheats a creature into play, and then you just win the game.
Yeah, I can't think of a matchup specifically that I would want Cleric, a combo matchup specifically that I would want Cleric's effect over Priest's effect.
Yeah.
Outside of like decks that cast spells from the graveyard, but those don't really happen besides Echo, and Echo you generally can't hit with a Remorseful Cleric either.
I think if the only one I could think of really is like Dredge, and Dredge does not exist, so it's kind of a non-issue.
And I don't think Dredge can beat a Containment Priest.
No, they really can't. It's just that if you don't get the Priest into play before they have a couple of creatures, then I think Cleric beats that a little bit. So it's like Cleric is like better on the draw, I guess. But that's about it, and it's pretty minor. So I'm gonna leave this to you. Tell me about Trailblazer's Torch.
So Trailblazer's Torch is very bad if you read the card. If we want to look at this, it's 4 mana and ETB take the initiative, and none of the other text matters. It doesn't have any other text box. There's no equip cost. There's no when your equipped creature comes blocked, it doesn't do anything. Don't even look at it. It happens to be an artifact with the subtype equipment, so we can treat it with Stoneforge Mystic, and it lets you take the initiative, and that's it. Notably, this is good because initiative is, I won't say dead, because people are definitely still trying to make it work, but it's much less of a presence than it once was. So decks are becoming less equipped to take the initiative back again, because it no longer matters nearly as much. The other thing is that D&T is a really good deck at protecting the initiative. It is just a big creature heavy control, like removal heavy control deck. So very often you just have a clogged up board, or you have a bunch of removal spells in hand to protect the initiative, and having this very tutorable torch in your deck, you have, if you really want it, you have Recruiter for Stoneforge for Torch, or you just have Stoneforge for Torch in the grinding matchups that you want it. think that's mostly it.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I'm excited to try it. It was kind of on my mind as like something to always look into. It was never to your point. It wasn't really worth looking into during the initiative meta because it's way too slow against the decks that matter. Um, and I think most decks, again to your point, most decks did not care about you casting a 4-drop on turn 4 that takes the initiative because if they were surviving in the meta, they had to deal with the initiative on turn 1 potentially. So
Yeah, and the big thing is people tried this in like the actual initiative decks, especially in like PvDHs when he was playing Stoneforge Mystic, and it was bad. It was really bad in those lists. I think the key difference is that the actual initiative Stompy decks were trying to put the initiative into play super early before you had really a chance to try to take it back and just kind of snowball an advantage like that.
mm-hmm.
Whereas D&T instead uses it as a recruitable card advantage engine. Something I harp on day and night to no end is when people ask me about card advantage cards in D&D or virtual card advantage cards sometimes, maybe not necessarily card advantage cards like Cataclysm or Seasoned Dungeoneer or some other 4-drop that I'm probably not thinking of, or like
Sarah Paragon.
Sarah Paragon or Wandering Emperor or Gideon Ally of Zendikar. And the big problem is that you're an 80 card deck with no ways to find these cards. So sometimes they will be really good in the grinding matchups when you draw them, but you will very, very, very often not draw. So the ability to have a tutorable grindy card, I think, is way more important.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I'm excited to try it out. I think the one problem, the one concern I have with it, Keegs XLII, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the stream. Um, I think the main concern I have with it is it does sort of have a Palace Jailer problem, which is that I think given our propensity for winning the long game against a lot of fair decks, there is a sense that like I get concerned about whether you need the initiative, how many games the initiative will win you games that you wouldn't have won otherwise,
I
and
definitely agree.
and whether or not putting the initiative into play is just opening more opportunities for your opponent than it is securing your ability to win that game.
Yeah,
I think there's.
I think
Go ahead.
I think that's definitely fair. The I guess the deciding factor for me will be how many matchups are there that you actually want this that aren't like, I won't say free, but very good. Like if 4 colors is the only grindy deck in the format, right? Just like Uro, Minsk, Endurance, whatever. You don't need this torch. That matchup was already very, very good. But like if Yorion Zenith comes back, if Lands comes back, if I don't know any other grindy decks off the top of my head, but like,
It's mostly those two, or like if that like 4-color ephemerate deck happens again.
yeah,
I think like those Yorion decks have the problem of like, well, they're also either Ice Fang and or Baleful Strix decks, so like protecting the initiative is a little bit tougher, but like maybe in those matchups we just need another way to threaten them. I would totally believe that.
yeah. And the fact that it's a value engine that can also turn corners fast is really nice. Like,
Yeah.
obviously not Cauldra, but if you want to start beating down, you can grab Torch and do, go into Forge, into Trap Room, deal a bunch of damage that way versus, like Post or whatever.
Yeah, that's a very good point too.
I guess one other thing about Torch versus Jailer, because that's obviously the very easy comparison to make the actual recruitable value engines. I think that losing the Monarchy will lose you a lot of games that losing the Initiative will not.
Yeah, that
it's
is
not it's not an instant loss where you, God forbid, you exile a creature of theirs with your Palace Jailer, then they take the initiative back, they get their creature back, they start drawing a card every turn to prevent you from taking it back. The initiative doesn't have that sort of immediate impact, so you can afford sometimes to lose the initiative for 1, 2, even like 3 turns if you're like trading it back and forth, and you're not like gonna get run over because you lost the initiative.
Yeah, I definitely actually remember noticing that like the couple of streams that I played Seasoned Engineer in D&T. Like it turns out, particularly in the previous meta, there were a lot of decks where like them searching up a basic basically didn't matter. they either didn't have one in their deck or they had like one island and they already had 4 lands in play because that's how many lands they needed to take the initiative from you in the first place. Um, so that is something I think I overlook is how much that first room kind of doesn't matter
Yeah,
in
that was a
in
big
a
thing
lot
about
of situations at least.
yeah, that was a big thing about Initiative Stompy as a deck too, is that you needed to take the initiative from them and then also just kill all their creatures because they would play the initiative trade game just every turn and would not care about it because they were going to beat you down faster,
Yeah.
and they don't care if you're accruing a little bit of an advantage at the same time as them.
Yep. Absolutely. The other list we'll take a look at quickly is isolated systems. It's pretty similar to the ones that we were just looking at. Oh, one other thing I wanted to actually point out about your list is you're also low on Mind Break Trap here. I assume probably for somewhat similar reasons to me. Um,
Yeah, I wasn't about to start respecting people casting LED.
yeah,
And then I played against Doomsday like 4 times in the past 3 days.
yeah, that's just how it goes, right?
Yeah, it's not great. Um, something that maybe will break down as we start talking about the meta is that I do think that D&T will probably just initially struggle because at the beginning of all these metas, people love to experiment, pick up their pet decks or whatever, play random nonsense. D&T has traditionally struggled against a lot of random nonsense in terms of combo decks, less so in terms of fair decks because you're one of the best fair decks in the format. But basically, anyone that just like wants to cast LED in their random deck will very often just kind of clown on you.
Yep. You want to do a quick explanation of what this Emrakul is here for?
Just for the grindy matchups.
You want to elaborate on that one?
And by the grindy matchups, I mean the grindstone matchups.
There we go.
It's very specifically a painter card. I think it's pretty bad as a league card. I tried to not to have too much distinction in my lists over like league versus challenge metas because mostly I'm playing leagues to plan for bigger events.
Mm-hmm.
Painter during the initiative era became such a huge presence that I think it's fairly correct for a lot of decks to be playing a Gaia's Blessing or an Eldrazi in the sideboard, especially with a deck like D&T. Getting a ton of value from one matchup for a single sideboard card seems pretty reasonable. It's also specifically Emrakul, not like Kozilek or Ulamog or Gaia's Blessing, because you're never casting any of them, and Emrakul is the best to put in off of a show and tell, which has been kind of making a comeback. So you get just board it in there and cross your fingers, hope for the best sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting that like both against both red and blue painter. Again, we'll talk about the specific matchups in a bit, but like if you are able to board in an Emrakul and ignore the combo in those matchups, it seems like the matchup kind of becomes free.
Yeah, it's so much easier. Obviously, as this tech catches on and Painter like just doesn't blindly go for it in post-board games, they need to assemble like a 3-card combo, find like a Soul Guide Lantern in addition to the other 2 pieces. It'll be a harder dance, but very specifically, a lot of the games you lost a Painter are either just dying to the combo or dying to like their anemic beatdowns because you're having to dance around the combo, kind of Splinter Twin style.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we will certainly draw it every time.
Yes,
but...
you will also draw it every single time.
So the only other list we'll look at real quick is Isolated System. This is a list that he posted it was a 5.0 with, I believe.
Yeah.
Either just earlier today, if not yesterday.
Yesterday.
His is sort of a hybrid of both of ours in that he's playing Field of Ruin. He's also playing this. He's playing the Field of Ruin from my list, the Sanctum Prelate from yours.
He's also got the Timeless Dragon. I think he cut the 4th Wisp, it looks like.
Yeah, got the 4th Wisp for the Timeless Dragon.
Also kind of fine.
And then his extra 2-drop of choice is Aethersworn Canonist, if Moto will let me increase it. There we go.
Yeah. I think respecting the LED decks more than we are also does do a reasonable job versus a lot of the other nonsense combo decks. It's obviously not as good against something like Reanimator or Breakfast or Oops or something if you get to a turn 2. But it definitely has more applicability, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. You already said it. I'm not super interested in respecting LED. I think my main My only real problem with Canonist is that I think there's like too many matchups where it is basically just a bear. Um, I think even the one thing I like about Containment Priest, between the fact that it actually has a lot of small impacts kind of everywhere, is that like you can turn your wisps into removal spells. Obviously, that's not what you're playing it in your deck for, but at least like the floor for that card feels like a little bit higher to me.
Yeah. It's a little dicey sometimes when you draw it and you have your Aether Vial going, but
Yeah.
I've also been burned before by having a Canonist in play and not being able to double spell.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
not every card's perfect. I do think D&T in general really, really wants a good 2-mana hate bear, and just there's nothing that exists.
Yeah, we're playing with 2014 still.
Yes, we really just please, Watsy, just give us a 2-mana hate bear that doesn't suck.
Yeah.
I'm begging you.
Yeah, so I think ley lines are popular between all of us, at least because they're good in leagues. I know, Jr. You just said like you don't really care about leagues specifically because you're playing for bigger tournaments. So I assume that means that you would bring ley line into a challenge if you were to play one this weekend.
Yeah, I do think that graveyard deck, like most of the combo decks that are good right now, are graveyard decks. So I do think that graveyards are the best thing to be respecting. There's a world where you can shift towards respecting LED if that's what you want to do. You probably cut ley lines, play a full set of surgicals, and then like one fairy macabre, and then use the extra space for extra mindbreak traps or deafening silences or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a bigger fan of just, trying to dodge a little bit of the nonsense, get a little lucky, and then make sure that you have a very solid plan for Reanimator and Oops and, Breakfast and all those other graveyard decks.
Yeah, yeah, I pretty much agree with that. Comment from the chat. If Warhammer 40k Scarab was on Modo, would there be an argument between choosing Prelate or the Scarab?
Oh, that card was sweet. What is that card?
It's a 4-mana 1/1 if I remember right, and when it comes into play, you exile a graveyard and you get a 1/1 for every creature or artifact that you exile.
Artifact or land?
Artifact or land. Okay.
It's tough. So
I remember that there was someone who played it in a list in Japan, which probably surprises no one.
Yeah.
And it seemed kind of interesting because like being able to like make an army of blockers against Delver while also clearing their graveyard seems kind of cool.
Yeah. Artifact or land is a little awkward. Obviously, land is cool because you'll probably end up getting like 3/1/1s at minimum, just off of like fetch lands or something. Like this is just absolutely bodying a control deck.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a cool card. I would probably be willing to try it out if it was on Modo. I don't know if I would be cutting Prelate for it.
Yes.
I would probably. I'm not even sure what I'd be cutting really.
I'd probably just cut like fourth wisp or something.
Yeah.
It's a 4-mana card, which is a little bit dicey. I say as I'm like talking accolades about Trailblazers Torch. I do want to specify. I don't know if I like mentioned it when I was talking about Trailblazers Torch as a card. I'm not confident that it is a great card that D&T should be playing. I think it is interesting enough that people should be trying it.
Yes.
Want to make that clear. I'm not a Trailblazers Torch fanboy. I'm not here to tell you all that you guys need to go out and buy your foil copies right now. But it's a card that I'm intrigued enough to test.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a similar stance that I would have about Canoptic Scarab Swarm.
Yep. I'm gonna throw this one over to you real quick because it's your fault that these are in sideboards at all. How do you feel about Peacekeeper right now?
So I cut Peacekeeper from my lists, and I suggest that most people will probably do the same. I just haven't been super high on it lately. When it was in the sideboard initially, it was kind of the Emrakul slot, if that makes sense. There were a bunch of random matchups that like get better because you have a Peacekeeper in your deck, like Hogak and Sneak and Show and Elves and some random decks that revolve around having to attack you to kill you. Very occasionally, you could get this goofy position against Mono Green Post where they cast their Ulamog and you plow it, and then they have no more removal, and you can Peacekeeper them and deck them or whatever. I think a lot of the matchups where Peacekeeper has been a reasonable card have kind of dropped off or gotten better. Sneak and Show, Elves has kind of morphed into, if we're following the Newton guideline, has just morphed into a matchup where I think your normal cards are good enough. You don't really need a Peacekeeper that much. Also, Newton just loves to play a bunch of removal spells.
Yes.
Peacekeeper's harder to stick.
Yeah. Yeah, I was it's funny. I was like very close to cutting it until I played like 4 or 5 elves matches in like 3 leagues. Um and then nettle elves specifically.
Yeah, there was
Um
that spike in Nettle Elves during like that Eternal Weekend era.
Yeah, and it seemed like that kind of died off, and I had been like very close to cutting Peacekeeper, except I just kept playing against elves, and I just felt like
Yeah, it's a fine sideboard slot. Like similarly to what I talked about with Emrakul, D&T loves to get pretty like high equity out of like a single sideboard card in a broad spectrum of matchups, and Peacekeeper does do that sometimes. I just think that a lot of the matchups where I would want a Peacekeeper are generally good enough that I'm kind of looking elsewhere for my sideboard slots.
yeah. No, I think I agree with that, and that's why I cut it from mine. Um, so yeah, I think these lists don't look that different from what I've been playing for a while, even from the lists that you would have been playing before I guess around this time last year, before you started playing Moonstompy and playing the and then eventually going on to destroy the format with Initiative. Thanks, by the way.
Yeah. Specifically, something that I did on my stream on Tuesday is that I tried to like kind of rebuild D&T just kind of from the base up and try to figure out where the like flex slots were, what cards we could play in those slots. And the one thing I discovered is that like a lot of your cards are kind of set in stone. There isn't a ton of wiggle room in this deck.
Yeah, I was kind of like thinking about that when I was putting my list together. Is that like I feel like this might be something that you said before, so I might be just like stealing your words, but it's weird how it feels like there's almost more room in a 60 card list just because you can't actually play enough of any of the cards you want, so you can kind of just make up the numbers everywhere and it like feels more flexible. Um, and then you get to an 80 card list and you just want to like because you can four of basically everything, it feels like most lists just kind of have to start from there. Don't play 60 cards though. Let me just make that very clear.
Uh, in the chat, the Grafdigger's Cage slot, yeah, it's mostly kind of an elves nod to elves while still being a graveyard hate card. It's faster versus the actual graveyard deck, so it's not like Rest in Peace bad versus Reanimator or Oops or something. It's also something you can do on the play, or as a secondary hate piece, and then also shows up versus the Green Sun Zenith decks.
Yeah, I think it's like a very surprisingly versatile card. I always feel like I'm kind of close to playing the second, but I've never actually pulled the trigger on it.
Yeah, I think at some points I was playing a second cage, like pre-shift into Saga D&T. I was think I might have been on 2 cages. It's definitely a reasonable graveyard piece.
And it makes a lot of sense to switch off of that when you play Saga because then you can just tutor for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of gone over our initial lists in the meta, let's talk about what the meta seems like it's going to be like. You know, we had the expressive iteration and White Plume Adventurer ban knocking down the two pillars of the format between Blue Red Delver and whichever flavor of initiative you are thinking of. And I think it's you kind of mentioned earlier that like certainly in the very beginning of the meta we'll have to be a little worried about the fact that D&T can't deal with nonsense and people will be trying a lot of nonsense. But it's hard to think of like a non-nonsense deck that we actually aren't pretty well positioned against.
Yeah.
Like the loss of initiative as like a pillar of the format is kind of bad because it was like I found it to be a pretty good matchup, but at the same time like there's going to be way fewer terminuses, way fewer true names, no like pro white garbage. And then who knows what Delver is going to end up looking like because It could be that we're going to see more 3-color Delver decks. Who knows, like what those 4 EIs are going to look like in blue-red. But either way, they're either going to kind of go more aggressive and be more susceptible to just kind of getting like 1-for-1 to death, which is exactly what we want to do against them anyway. Or, maybe they'll start playing some splash colors to make it so that they can generate more card advantage, or do stuff like support Mercurial Spelldancer and kind of go slower, but they're going to have to work a lot harder to generate that card advantage. And I think in either direction Delver takes, we're pretty happy about it.
Yeah, as much as I hate Murktide Regent specifically, and knew that Expressive Iteration was the card that would get the ban, but wanted Murktide Regent gone from my life. Expressive Iteration was probably the better card for Delver against DNT. DNT being this end-all, be-all, gigantic, grindy monster. But Delver getting to keep pace with it by, casting 6 Expressive Iterations in one game was not the greatest thing in the world for DNT, and I think you maybe lose more games to that than you do to Murktide Force. Will your removal spell attack you twice, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I think it helps that we have so many more removal spells than we did. Like, the last time we had any Delver deck to talk about, right? Like, we now have. We used to basically just have swords, and then we would have like Flicker Wisp as a good blocker, and now we have 12 incredibly good removal spells against them. So. So yeah, Delver's probably still going to be a good deck, although we have no idea what direction people are going to take it. We have like a couple sample lists that we can look at that I'm just pulling what few lists there are out from, post-ban lists. We can see that here is one where they're kind of playing, let's see, they're playing like these minor missteps, an extra Unholy Heat, Preordain, playing a Force Negation.
Chain Lightning, additional copies of Brazen Borrower. I've seen Mercurial Spelldancer. I've seen Third Path Iconoclast. I've seen really, really bad card advantage cards they probably shouldn't be playing. I think Predict is probably the least bad, but I don't think it's playable in Delver.
I'll think so.
Eat my words on that one.
I think the only reason it would be is because of Dragon's Rage Channeler.
I mean, yeah, in like a 4 DRC 4 Bobble deck, I think you could probably get away with it. Whether or not you want to is a different question. I think my instinct is that Delver will just kind of switch to a more aggressive deck, maybe play some extra creatures, and then just have some dedicated anti-control cards in the sideboard. Just like play a normal Delver deck that's maybe a little bit more aggressive, a little more less grindy now, and then have like sideboard Court of Cunning, Counterbalance, Price of Progress, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Or obviously branch out into 3 colors. But
yeah, I've heard of some people playing Rug with Tarmogoyfs again. I'm sure some people might stick with like a Black Splash at least for Snuff Out, maybe even playing like, I don't know, are people interested in playing Gurmag Angler again? Probably not, but maybe.
I saw in the blue-red Splash Snuff Out lists, I saw some people sideboarding 2 Gurmag Anglers.
Really? Huh. All right.
Definitely a weird one.
Yeah. And so
Stifle this week's, oh god, people love to cast Stifle whenever something happens. It's never playable. Stop casting Stifle.
Yeah. One deck that I think people are expecting to take off a bit, that's kind of been gone for a while because of initiative. I'm going to pass this over to you as a noted Moonstopping expert, and give me your thoughts. A quick summary of your thoughts on the deck getting better, but also, what that means for us as D&T players.
So I think Moonstopping is actually like one of the best decks in the format pre-initiative, and one of the biggest problems for Moonstopping is that its Delver matchup was not favorable. Delver matchup wasn't actually that bad, I don't think, but it was definitely like not great. But any hit the Delver takes, you're very happy as a Moonstomping player. A less good Delver deck will just obviously make your matchup better in any way, shape, or form. Even though this deck absolutely wanted Murktide banned over EI.
Yes, yeah,
would be ecstatic to see that ban happen. But in general, I think Moonstomping is poised to make a pretty strong comeback since its natural predator's initiative fully dead for now. Um, Delver weakened, gets to prey on. Unlike D&T, I think the best strat to be doing in volatile new meta is play a very aggressive and proactive game plan. So, like Delver or like Moonstompy, you slam your very aggressive cards. You have all these annoying interactive pieces, Force of Will or Chalice of the Void, Daze, Trinisphere, stuff like that. So I would be shocked if Moonstompy didn't come back as a pretty powerful force in the meta. This specific list was me experimenting with some things. I was trying out Gut because Gut came out on Moto at the exact same time White Plume Adventure Season Dungeoneer did. It was a card I was kind of interested in trying. After playing I think I played 3 Moonstompy leagues. I don't think it's very good. I'll probably play 0 copies, but other than that, this list is probably pretty close to what you want to be doing. I think Lysis Hearse is really, really, really good right now. Versus all the graveyard decks. You can play it on turn 1. It's good versus Uro. It's good versus Delver. Secretly one of the best cards in the deck.
Yep.
And I think its bad matchups are pretty few and far between right now. Notably for D&T, that's great because D&T is a very bad matchup for this deck.
Yes, and it seems the more I look at it, the more I'm realizing that you aren't even playing. You're basically playing 5 Rabble Masters, really. 4 Rabble Masters and 1 Squee. I don't even see
I
any.
would probably cut the guts for 1. What's the other Rabble Master? Legion War Boss.
Legion War Boss. Yep.
I'd probably be playing Legion War Boss and then a second Dead Gone now.
Yeah, which is certainly better than the Gut, but still not great. Mostly the way that Moonstompy wins against D&T is punking them out with really fast Rabble Master draws, ideally with a Trinisphere in front of it.
Yeah. Turn 1 Trinisphere on the play into turn 2 Rabble Master into turn 3 Rabble Master. Stuff like that. But generally D&T absolutely mops the floor with this deck.
Yeah. And I'm happy to see it come back because those wins will be easier than the ones against Initiative, that's for sure. So let's talk about some other decks. Next, we're going to talk about some that got popular because of their good matchups against Initiative, and it's going to be interesting to kind of see where they land in a world where Initiative isn't here. We'll start with Painter. We'll start with the blue version. Notably, we already talked about how the inclusion of Emrakul in your sideboard makes these matchups quite a bit easier because when you only have to worry about the kind of mopey beatdown plan from these decks, it is so much easier to deal with them. Especially so against Blue Painter because they don't really have their beatdown plan is basically just the 4 Urza Sagas and I guess technically the 4 Thought Monitors, and aside from that, it's just a bunch of 1/2s and a bunch of 1Xs basically.
Yeah, that's the thing I zeroed in on when I was scoping out D&T and initially wanted to put an Emrakul in. I was looking at these Blue Painter lists. And I was like, this plan B is actually horrible. Mono Red Planner's plan B could work sometimes. You had better access to reanimating things with your welders and engineers, getting dragon whatever engine, the double strikey thingy.
Yep.
You had Fable, the flip, so you could duplicate constructs, beat down really fast like that. This deck has almost none of that. I think its plan B is really, really bad. So I think their main plan against an Emrakul would be trying to assemble the 3-card combo, which is Grindstone plus Painter plus the Soul Guide Lantern. But I think that's way harder. And also you can just kind of wait to try to disrupt that once they assemble the 3rd piece. Then you can put the Swords of Plowshares or the Solitude on their Painter Serpent or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, and I guess you already mentioned Red Painter, so we'll switch over to that one. I think this matchup is probably worse than blue for some of the reasons that you mentioned. They aren't as fast as Blue Painter, but they are a lot more resilient and have a much more coherent plan B, especially with Fable the Mirror Breaker kind of
Fury.
Yeah, Fable, Fury, Dragon Engine, like you mentioned. Yeah, I think it's still a pretty good matchup. Like even when you don't have Emrakul in your sideboard, you can still like
Yeah.
play your normal removal heavy game plan against them, and it is annoying when you have to like figure out how to play around both the combo and their beatdown plan, but that only happens so often. Um, I think these matchups are so much better with the printing of Loran. Um, I think like it seems like a lot of the games against them, if you can just like cast that card once a turn with a Crocus, then they have a very tough time keeping up with that.
Yeah, I've definitely chewed through a lot of painter board states with Laron plus Saga or plus Caracas. Absolutely murdering like a bunch of fables and sagas and random other artifacts in play.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about this deck that probably won't happen for another couple months is it'll eventually get Chaos Defiler, which is a
Yes.
really fucked up card.
Yeah, that card's stupid. I'm curious how much it'll matter for D&T because like the bright side for us is that like I know that I've heard like in paper at least that it was like absolutely backbreaking against initiative, and I think that makes sense to me. The nice thing, at least for D&T, is that like our cards in play don't matter as much. So
Yeah,
like
we're a control deck. Everything has like ETBs, everything's like removing things from play. There aren't a lot of situations where you're getting comboed down by a welder activating every turn because you're so removal dense. So yes, Chaos Defiler is what 5 mana, 5/4 trample that ETB shoots one of your things.
yeah,
Um, but that is, I think, much more beatable in a deck like D&T than a deck like Initiative. Also, like 5 power plus trample is annoying for Initiative because it's much harder to block if you can remove it. They could take Initiative from you a lot easier.
yep. Yeah, that's a good point. That I didn't even think about that part. That it is just like a very good threat.
Yeah, I think that card is sweet and very good. A big upgrade for Painter, and obviously any upgrades for Painter will probably make the matchup worse. But I wouldn't be like super threatened of like, oh, Painter's gonna kill me with their plan B of their like 5/4s and stuff beating you down, because especially if you have like the Emrakul, it's a lot easier to plan for those situations.
Yep, absolutely.
When it dies, it destroys. It has other tags. I gotta look up Chaos Defiler.
Yeah, I think that's like part of why it's kind of dumb is that you
You
can
can
just
like
like
just blow up a million things when you're welding it out. When
yeah
Chaos Defiler enters the battlefield or dies, you get to choose a permanent, and notably doesn't target. Doesn't matter a ton. Obviously, it like goes around like Mother of Runes, which I guess does matter a little bit.
yeah
But yeah, or dies. I didn't know that. That's really fucked up.
yeah
Yeah, you basically just can't let a welder live ever.
yeah, which I think for what it's worth is mostly already true. So
Yes.
so I'm going to move on to the next deck here, Breakfast. This has been a really interesting matchup for me. But I think, thankfully, mostly I've had pretty good success against Breakfast. It took me a while to land on a sideboard plan that I really liked against them. Um, but I think the nice thing is that they are a creature combo deck. We have a lot of ways to remove creatures. Jite in particular is like kind of backbreaking against them. Um, I think mostly the games where you're afraid are the ones where they draw Teferi, um, since that will protect their combo from your removal spells, potentially just like bounce the threats that you need to get GT counters, things like that. But overall, I've had like a pretty good success rate against them, especially with these builds. Pretty much every build now just like has all the removal in the sideboard, none in the main, which I think helps, knowing that like basically anything that you do in game one, if it resolves, it's pretty much going to stay in play. Have
Yeah,
you had a chance to play against them yet with D&T?
I've not played against it with D&T, only with Initiative, where I had Max beat the shit out of me with this deck.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people liked to pretend that they had a good Initiative matchup. I think Breakfast was one of the only decks in the format besides Delver that actually got that title.
Mm-hmm.
This deck, unlike Painter, which actually did manage to start showing up because of like Fable the Mirror Breaker and was kind of popping up in spiking in popularity before Initiative came out. This deck absolutely rose during the Initiative meta, so I'm curious on its staying power outside of it, given that its main prey was the Initiative matchup. I do think that the deck is pretty powerful, and probably one of the reasons that it wasn't seeing play is just because people weren't like trying it. It was
Yeah.
just kind of a rediscovery. I'm curious on how well it sticks around, but I do think that the D&T's matchup against it is probably much better than Initiative's was.
Mhm.
There are definitely some things that are a little tricky, like Teferi specifically. You kind of want multiple levels of hate in play if it's permanent based. You want like Sash plus Containment Priest or like a Vial up, and in addition to having something already in play to prevent them from trying to go off on you. But you do just have a bunch of removal spells, and they do need at least one creature in play to combo you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think probably the only thing that concerns me is how many Aether Vials they're playing, because that makes the playing around their combo a little bit more difficult when they can just flash something in and you don't necessarily know what it's going to be. They can like kind of force you to play removal spells even if they like have a backup, because like as soon as Nomads and Cephalid are in play, game's over. Um, so if they like have a Nomads and then activate a Vial on two, you have to kill the Nomads and maybe they'll just put in a Strix, or maybe they'll just put in nothing and then just cast another Nomads or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely a matchup that is also probably very tough. There's a lot of weird, tricky angles. You can never really feel safe. It feels almost like similar to Depths in that way, of just like you're constantly walking a tightrope and you really need to kill them because they will just fucking pull something out of a hat and kill you out of nowhere. It's a really annoying matchup in that sense, but I'm not certain on how bad it is quite yet.
Yeah.
Notably, there has been something going on in sideboards that is a little scary, I think, and that is I have seen Painterless playing Memory's Journey plus a Jack-o'-lantern. For those of you that don't know the text on those cards, you don't really need to. It's mostly just casting Memory's Journey after they mill their whole deck using the Jack-o'-lantern. So this is a method that beats targeted graveyard hate, things that aren't like specifically Rest in Peace or Leyline of the Void. They can just flop their whole deck into their graveyard, try to Dread Return you. If you have Surgical Extraction or Fairy Macabre or a Containment Priest in play, or trying to think of other graveyard hate of that caliber, but those are the main ones that I can think of. Then they can cast the Memory's Journey, target their Thassa's Oracle, and just cast the Thassa's Oracle and kill you the following turn.
Yeah, it's also notably good if your opponent just like has a Force of Will for your Dread Return, like just another way to go off through like a piece of counter magic if you like don't have to Fairy in play or your own protection in hand or anything like that.
Notably, this is scary for D&T because I don't think this is a leyline matchup. I think it's too slow and fair for that. It's not a matchup where you get to just mold a 4. Oh, I have my leyline. I get to buy myself like 5 turns to cobble together a new strategy.
Yeah.
You kind of need to lean on your other graveyard hate, Surgicals, Rest in Peace, Grafdigger's Cage. Rest in Peace and Cage are good against this plan. But if this trick does catch on, then Surgical starts to look a lot worse. You need 2 Surgicals to not die. That's something that I'm a little worried about, but obviously you can just put the combo in other ways. If you just have removal, if you have your GTA in play with counters on it, stuff like that. It's something to keep in mind in terms of what our graveyard hate looks like going forward. If this deck picks up a popularity, maybe you want to play a second Cage or second Rip, stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree that it's not a leyline matchup for the reasons you mentioned. Like, it isn't. Now that they're not playing like Stoneforge, generally, I think most of the lists I've seen are off of Stoneforge. It is still a matchup where the number of cards in your hand matters a lot, and you both can't afford to mulligan that hard. And I think even Leyline in play just doesn't do a whole lot because they have a lot of ways to actually get around it. Like, they're playing 2 Step Through in their deck, so they can Step Through for Oracle, mill their deck, just cast it from hand. They can Teferi your Leyline and just go off normally. And I think given the number of ways that they have to get around a ley line, you'll probably just lose way more games to top decking ley line than you will win games by putting into play on turn 0.
Yeah, I agree. And then Luna also points out you can beat the Memory's Journey plan by untapping and targeting Illusionist. Memory's Journey is an instant, right?
It is,
Yes,
yeah.
because you can respond to the surgical with it. So you would need specifically to be able to target the Illusionist on their upkeep, right? Because they could just not cast the Memory's Journey until their upkeep and then stack the third on top of their deck.
Yes.
They just leave their deck empty until then. So you would have to have like a Plow or a Solitude, and if you have those, then I don't know why they're comboing you in the first place.
Yeah. Well, they have to, I guess if you have the surgical, they have to Memory's Journey right away, which means that you can do it on your turn.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you could surgical, then untap and cast your Skyclave or your I don't know, something else that targets. That's fair.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that that comparison you brought up with depths, I think is actually pretty fair. I think they are pretty close. I think I actually kind of have liked playing against this matchup because of how interesting it is, although not as much as depths. I think playing, especially against like green white X depths, has been some of the most fun I've had playing Magic lately. But yeah. We'll have to see more about whether this deck sticks around. I think if it does, it'll be a very interesting matchup. Hard to say whether it will be good or bad. I know that I have had some good experience against it, but, only one person and only so many matches. So another one that I think we're going to see quite a bit of, talking about nonsense, is Reanimator. It's almost always the case in a new format where people love to put Grizzlebrand into play and beat up people who can't deal with putting a Grizzlebrand into play. It's a big reason that I think for a while I'm probably just gonna. I mean, I've been playing 4 ley lines in my league lists for forever, but I think if I was playing in a challenge, I almost certainly would still be on ley lines. Very little about this deck has changed. So there's not a whole lot to say about it. They do now have the access to Atraxa Grand Unifier, potentially. I think the only real difference that this card makes is that if you've already dealt a bunch of damage to them, then Atraxa is a way to have like a mini Grizzlebrand that you don't have to pay life for.
Yeah, I think Atraxa and Red Black is like the weakest place for Atraxa. I think it's maybe still fine as a one of. I'm not a Reanimator player. I'll let them figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it looks a lot better as a card in the blue black lists where you can pitch it to Force of Will and like the natural order lists, or if you're cheating to play some other way. I don't think Atraxa meaningfully like changes a lot of matchups with the deck overall.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, I think this matchup is basically the same as it always has been. I think the only real thing I'm noting here is that this list, I don't know if this is going to be a standard going forward, but this list does not have a Sarah's Emissary.
I'd be ecstatic if they didn't play Sarah's Emissary.
Yeah, I don't know if this is just a one-off thing. Let me make sure I didn't miss it. Yeah, okay, I did not miss it. I also would be ecstatic about it. Hopefully that stays true, if it even is true in the first place. But we'll see. Yeah, I think this matchup has been a known quantity for a while. You will lose lots of game ones, win most your game twos, play annoyingly tight game threes, and generally have a positive matchup, but never feel like you're playing a good game. That's Reanimator for you.
I think it's one of your best matchups in terms of anti-combo. But you're never really happy to see it.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, notably, I think Show and Tell. This has been probably true for a while, but Show and Tell, with just 4 copies in the sideboard, has been very stock for a while now. So it is important to note that you don't just auto win if you put your ley line into play.
Yep.
Because they do have the Show and Tell plan. I mean, notably, D&T is one of the best decks at beating a Show and Tell. You have a lot of things that you can put in off the Show and Tell, just like flat out invalidate, putting in an Archon or whatever. You can put in Solitudes or put in your Recruiters, go get a Solitude. You can put you can cast Containment Priest in response. One of the only graveyard hate cards that also beats Show and Tell.
Yep.
One of the other reasons I was kind of high on trying Containment Priest as like that hate bear slot is because we do see kind of a resurgence in people trying to cast Show and Tell lately.
Yep. Yep, D&T famously pretty good against show and tell putting in creatures since like 2012. Speaking of which, Sneak and Show.
Yeah, this is a deck that people, and by people I mean
Yeah.
JPA.
Let me. There's so many CMCs here. Let me start getting this all condensed. But yeah, this is JPA's list that he got like second in a challenge with recently, I think. Maybe it's a showcase.
Very well, obviously. JPA Sneak and Show Master. This is a deck that probably got actually better with Atraxa.
Yes, I definitely agree with that.
Pitch into Force of Will. It's really cool to put it off a sneak attack because it's like a Grizzlebrand that doesn't have to pay life. You can find your second creature pretty often. It lets you kind of cycle a show and tell, which is a weird way of putting it, I guess. But like, sometimes you can just beat show and tell putting in Grizzlebrand if you have Swords to Plowshares, if you're at a low life total or whatever. Putting in Atraxa, you draw a bunch of cards, and then like, okay, answers Atraxa. If you do, okay, I've probably cycled into, if I didn't hit exactly show and tell plus another fatty already, I've hit a bunch of cantrips to go find that second show and tell. That all said, I think this matchup just got a decent portion better for D&T with the addition of Atraxa.
I think that I agree. It's I've only played against actual Sneak and Show, I think once or twice since Atraxa got printed, and it felt very different from how Sneak and Show used to be, but not necessarily in a bad way. It felt like I remember like, back in the day, a lot of times like they would cast a single show and tell, put in something, and you would answer that one creature by just putting a Caracas onto the battlefield and activating its ability, where you bounce a legendary creature to its controller's hand, and then you just won the game. And it feels like that dynamic's a little bit different with Atraxa because it basically always means that they have a follow-up fatty one way or another. And notably, it's a follow-up fatty that can stay in their hand and they can like play next turn, so that you have to have instant speed interaction for it. I mentioned that just because, like, sure, a lot of times you like sneak attack in a Grizzlebrand and you draw cards and you put something in and then you just win the game that way. But like most of the time, a sneak attack usually involves them passing the turn to you, and you have the chance to lure in or Council's Judgment or Skyclave it. And I think Atraxa kind of putting all of that into your hand to just barf out into play all at once does change it a little bit. Probably not enough to say that this matchup isn't still good, though.
Yeah, the other thing is that because they have more Atraxas, they have less Omnisciences, and Omniscience is the best card in their deck they could possibly play versus D&T.
Yep.
So less Omniscience, obviously much better.
Yep.
This deck looks and feels a lot more like old pre-Omniscience Sneak and Show, where it was just like 4 Emrakul, 4 Grizzlebrand, 4 Sneak Attack, 4 Show and Tell, and just like, okay, well, I have a Phyrexian Revoker on Sneak Attack and a Caracas, you lose.
Yeah, anytime I see a sneak attack, I just think about the days and just like wish that I could, cheat a Revoker into my deck just for this one matchup. But
same. And then they put Omniscience in their deck, and the matchup got a lot worse. So them cutting Omniscience is good. A play pattern that I have noticed, I think I was watching your stream when I first noticed it, is that traditionally in the D&T versus Sneak and Show matchup, they will cast a good Sneak and Show player will cast Sneak and Show or cast Show and Tell, and you will be dead, because the only card they're ever going to put in off this is Omniscience, unless they are just kind of throwing a Hail Mary. I need this Emrakul to kill them. If they have Solitude or a Caracas, then I'm going to die. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's I'm going to put it in Omniscience and kill you, and that means that the first Show and Tell always kills you, and that Surgical Extraction is not a very good card, except in the rare cases that they had Intuition in their deck. But now I have felt that Surgical could possibly, this is more of a theory than actual sideboard plan is, you could potentially have Surgical Extraction in your deck for Show and Tell again. Because the first Show and Tell doesn't always kill you, Show and Telling in your Atraxa just to churn through a bunch of your deck to find your Omniscience potentially could mean that you do have an opening where there's actual Show and Tell in the graveyard, which has almost never been the case previously.
Yeah. So. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think I remember us talking about it, and I definitely agree that like the nature of Atraxa, the nature of both this matchup against us and what Atraxa enables is that, like, yeah, multiple. It's much more likely that multiple show and tells get cast in a game, um, and getting rid of that as an avenue, I think, is probably worth boarding in surgicals, especially given that, like, we certainly have plenty of cards that aren't that great against them. Um, Particularly when we see how removal light, like at least this list in particular is. There's just like the two Brotherhood's ends, and mostly the only creature you really care about staying in play is Containment Priest. Um, Obviously Thalia and Spirit are good, but like they don't like, especially now that they have Atraxa, and it's not like they, it used to be that like if they put in Grizzlebrand and you put in a Spirit, then like they just cried. Um, but Atraxa doesn't draw cards, so it's a way that they can still get card advantage even with a Spirit in play. So, but yeah, I think if this deck picks up, I think we'll be mostly happy. I think the play patterns will be a little bit different, but still overall good, as long as this Omniscience count stays right around here. If it gets any higher,
he's got one on the sideboard. I don't think he needs that.
Yeah, just cut it.
We can play other cards.
Just play something else. Get out of here. There is only one more matchup that I have for us to talk about real quick.
We don't have to talk about it. We could just move on.
If a certain person wasn't in the chat, I would skip it. But we'll talk about Doomsday. This matchup sucks. It's always gonna suck. There's just not much else to say about it, other than considering the ways in which this deck's viability might change based on the way that the meta changes after the bans. I know one thing that is that has been pretty important for Doomsday is that they have been pretty weak to Delver. Delver's aggressive, has a lot of permission. It's really hard for Doomsday to beat a deck that has Force of Will and also 1 mana 3/3s when their premier card deals them half of their life in damage. Sorry, life loss. Don't judge me. On the one hand, Delver is going to certainly be less popular, at least for a bit, because it isn't so clearly the better than everything else that anybody could be doing. On the other hand, if Delver takes a more aggressive stance, generally speaking, that probably means that Delver's matchup against Doomsday gets even better than it already was, because this wasn't, to my understanding, this wasn't really a matchup where expressive iteration mattered that much. So I think there's not much to say about us playing this matchup. You will die. You will have very little agency in any of the games. But depending on how things land, maybe Doomsday just gets worse enough that we won't have to talk about this as much.
Yeah. I saw some Doomsday players tweeting that the Doomsday actually gets worse in the meta, relatively speaking. And I'm not a combo expert by any means, but it does make sense to me. I've been telling people a lot. Delver's matchups against grindy decks has gotten worse, but like their combo matchup has probably changed very little overall.
Yeah.
EI was not the card they needed to beat combo decks. And I'm pretty sure that most combo decks are exactly as happy to play against Delver as they were pre-expressive iteration ban, if not even less happy, like you mentioned, if they get more aggressive, they play more bolts or like aggressively slanted creatures, stuff like that.
I'm even thinking like maybe the creatures and the removal stays about the same, but instead of EI, they're playing like, I don't know, minor missteps, spell pierces, things like that. Who knows what they might do. I'm not a blue player. I'm not going to speculate, but it seems like most options end up being not great for decks like Doomsday.
Yeah. That all being said, D&D's matchup just sucks. It's not very fixable.
No, it is completely unfixable. The only good thing that can really happen is if if the slower Doomsday decks get a little bit more popular, the ones
Everyone
that like
go follow Samantha Murphy on Twitter. I think it's at Samantha Rose Murphy, if I'm not mistaken.
Sam Rose Murphy,
Sam Rose
I think.
Murphy. Let
Yeah,
me double check that. Sam Rose Murphy. You're correct. All right, everyone go follow her. Great Doomsday player. Just copy her list card for card. Don't listen to all these. Don't listen to Wonder Pro, Monkeys Can't Cry, Max Torsion, unless he's shilling for the or the slow Doomsday lists. Don't listen to any of them. Put Murktide Regions and Baleful Strixes in your Doomsday deck. I'm begging you.
we will probably still lose all the time, but at least we will have like a smidgen of a chance.
Yes.
There's monkeys
You
can't
will
cry
still lose,
himself.
but you will have more hope in doing so. Also, yes, do actually go follow Sam Rose Murphy. She does also stream Legacy on occasion on Twitch, as well as have good Twitter takes.
Yeah.
Except when she was trying to buy Foil Odyssey price. No one's perfect.
No, it's perfect. Oh boy. All right, yeah. I think the only other matchup I really wanted to talk about was was control. Generally speaking, I shouldn't say four colors specifically because who knows what control is going to look like. I couldn't find any lists yet. There's just none really posted anywhere. But generally, when talking about control, I think there's basically two different things we could be talking about. Either we're talking about the Jeskai control lists that are kind of like what Miracles used to be, but without the Miracles, playing more Planeswalkers, winning with cards like Mentor, Shark Typhoon, dumb things like that.
Sometimes Days Undoing, sometimes not.
Yep. And then there's the Uro flavor of control decks that are always blue, green, something, probably white, or almost certainly white, probably also red. Notably, the red splash isn't as good without expressive iteration, but obviously Minsk and Boo is still a very good control card, a very good finisher for them. The red sideboard cards are always going to be really good as well. But I think mostly the only thing to say about those decks is that they have always been pretty good matchups, and I think regardless of the slant they take, they will probably continue to be good matchups. It'll just kind of be interesting to see where they land. As long as Jeskai doesn't play Days Undoing, not even because I think that those matchups are worse, although they are, just that, I really could not. If I never had to play against another card that had the Time Twister text on it, it really would be too soon.
Probably in terms of most annoying legacy cards to play against it, I think currently under Thassa's Oracle for me is Echo of Aeons.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see these cards.
But,
yeah. I think all flavors of control will probably be pretty good for D&T outside of like the four color Zenith, like the McWinsauce pile style decks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one notable thing about those decks is I think one of the big reasons we actually had a tough time against them was because of the Primeval Titan endgame.
Yes.
And like getting like Field of the Dead and a bunch of other garbage. Notably, that deck hasn't been popular since Lion Sash got printed, and I think Sash is actually a pretty big deal in that matchup because it means that your Wastelands can like actually do something. And I think they'll have a somewhat harder time winning with just their normal creatures. I found that like usually they need Field of the Dead to actually win.
Yeah. Also, note some of them Luna mentions. I know Fish Duggery has been playing the Uran Zenith deck as well and cut the Primeval Titan package for the Atraxa as like the big Green Sun Zenith end game value card.
Mm-hmm.
I think Atraxa's way more beatable for D&T than Primeval Titan is.
Yes. Yeah, if they're not even playing like like Titan was annoying because it was like an engine that also kind of won the game on the spot. I think Atraxa is not as good at doing that because
Atraxa is a 7/7 that draws like 4 cards,
yeah,
which I think is definitely more beatable than oh, now I have, 6, 8 2/2 zombies.
Yeah.
Tom posted a list with both Atraxa and Titan. Okay, I don't know. I'm not. Maybe they'll cut Titan, maybe they won't. We can only hope.
Yeah. Scary Dinosaur Man. I don't know what that is referring to.
Is that the new, like the new T-Rex guy, the 7-drop? I've seen that as like a natural order bullet in like some NO decks, but doesn't seem very good.
Yeah, I'll need an exclamation point card on that one.
It's Ward 4, Haste, Trample 7/6, and like a negligible amount of Toxic.
Oh, that one. Okay. I don't know.
I wouldn't find that scary out of most decks, especially not out of just like a random control deck. If they want to find that, like Ward 4 is pretty payable with a Solitude or a Plow. You can kill it if they don't put it into play on like turn 2.
Yeah, I think the main reason that like Kappa Cannoneer is so unkillable is that like they're almost always casting it on like turn 3, and that's also a matchup where your mana is so absurdly strained. Like you always need like twice as much mana every turn than you have. And Cannoneer just makes that like even worse. But I feel like against a deck like this, these games against these decks go so ridiculously long that I feel like that I agree that ward is probably pretty playable, pretty payable.
Chad is desperately trying to figure out what the card's name is.
Frothing at the mouth, trying to find what the name of this card is.
It's a 7/7. Yeah, sure.
Natural Order is a 3-drop, but they're like if we're talking about like a Yorion deck, they're not going to have that. I don't know how many copies they have, but they're not going to have it as consistently.
Yeah, and if they're not specifically elves, you can kind of keep green creatures out of play for a bit too. If they just like have a Mana Dork and a Coatl or whatever.
Yeah. Keep trying, guys. Keep trying.
Exclamation point that the card instead of exclamation point card and then the card name. Hey, we got there.
There we go. We did it.
8/8.
Ooh, 8/8.
Look at that. We were all wrong.
Yep, that's the one. Cannot be countered.
Yes. Unlucky.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll lose games to that card, but I'm not gonna say that I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't lose sleep over it.
No, me either.
Looks in the realm of like the people that were trying to put Apex Altasaur into play. That card is fucking hilarious. Also not very good, but it is really funny.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure the Elder Dragon Highlighter players are definitely mad about it. They hate everything that produces poison counters.
It does kill them with poison before it deals lethal damage in a 40 life total format.
Yeah. Pretty well ahead of it too.
Yeah, 3 attacks, only 24 damage, but they're dead with 2 counters to spare.
And the ward for it doesn't matter because they don't play removal spells, right? So they're still mad about New Thrun. New Thrun is like, it's just a Thrun. What's the deal?
New Thrun does. All right, hang on. Let me see if I can get New Thrun. So 5 mana, 3 GG, 5/4. Can't be targeted by non-green sources. Indestructible only on your turn. Maybe trample. I don't know, and it can't be countered. It's a 5/5.
I think you got it. Other than the 5/5.
Oh, it doesn't have trample. Okay. Oh no, it does have trample.
It does have trample. Yeah.
Yes. So you can't Caracas it. I can't imagine anyone's playing this card in Legacy besides Nick Fit players. Oh, no, it can't be countered. Yeah, this spell can't be countered. That's like a classic of Thrun, right?
Yeah. I'm like,
can't imagine this is in a lot of decks that aren't specifically Nick Fit.
Yeah. And I mean, Nick Fit can play whatever they want, right? Doesn't matter. They can play any green card with CMC like 5 or higher, and I will not bat an eye.
Yeah. Devoted Druid mono green. All right, yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
You're allowed to put this card in your deck. I'm sure.
All right. Well, I think that about. I think the only last thing I want to talk about for like um, the state of the D&T union section of this stream is, we talked about like what our lists look like right now. And I think it's worth talking about like other things that we might change going forward, or other maybe specific cards that are on our mind. One thing I want to open up with is, as like I mentioned, I'm not playing Ephemerate anymore. Um, Given how much Ephemerate worked for me, I think I'm basically filing it into the same folder of personal preference lists as like Saga versus Sagaless, or the Red Splash. Um, I think basically if you are making a mistake by playing Ephemerate, I'm guessing that mistake is pretty small at worst. Um, and actually,
Yeah.
sort of looking at that, I'll let you finish, but I'm also curious what your feelings are on Saga builds, since you've played those much more extensively than I have.
So yeah, I think Ephemerate is probably a fine card to play in D&T going forward. It's a card that sometime during my D&T experimentation, I was like, a lot of people in Modern are playing this. Modern D&T is playing this card. Why aren't we playing this card? It feels like it could be really good. Dex has a bunch of ETB triggers, stuff like that. The more I played with it, the more I realized that the price of the extra mana is like astronomically higher in Legacy than it is in Modern. It's just a really hard card to hold up sometimes.
Mhm.
It is powerful and does have very good synergies with the deck, and you could definitely play it and be like relatively happy with it. But it's not a card I'm going to be interested in all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think I mostly the main reason that I liked it even more so than the synergy was just like against decks like Initiative. It was a way to force interaction proactively for only one mana. And I think that's something that we don't really have access to, like basically ever. Um, and so I found that pretty helpful. Like even obviously there were a lot of snuff outs in the meta, probably still will be. There were solitudes out of initiative as well, but I think like being able to force out those premier answers like that for only one mana was pretty valuable.
Yeah, it also helped because the worst matches against Initiative were they're like absolute nut draws, and if you had like Solitude plus Ephemerate in your hand, it was like one of the only possible ways to beat Initiative's like super busted nut draws.
Yeah, exactly. How do I feel about Ephemerate as a way to overload dress downs without playing Saga? That is an interesting question. Um,
Feels like a lot of slots in the deck. Saga was already like because you play up to 34 lands in Saga. You have to play the Saga Bullets. I don't know if that's even plural. You probably only add a Shadow Spear. Um, but I think Saga was a little bit more pressed for slots, and I don't see if you could fit Ephemerate in the deck. I also don't see Dressed Down seeing like a ton of play anymore. I think the big reason that I'm less interested in Saga is because the meta has settled on so many meltdowns.
mm-hmm.
And I think Meltdown's pretty bad against normal D&T. Like, if we look at this list, it's like, okay, 4 Aether Vials and a GT are the only cards you're reasonably shattering. I guess the Sash, too.
Yeah.
Um, and if you play Saga, then I'm not. Then suddenly you're opening yourself up to like much worse meltdowns. If you sometimes you just kind of have to go all in on it, make 2 constructs, grab a Shadow Spirit versus Delver, and then they just cast a meltdown. X=1, and your hard work and a bunch of mana is eaten alive. So basically, I guess my opinion is sort of what it was at the start of MH2, which is the meta massively overcorrected for Saga because like it was like mono white or affinity or blue white affinity won the first Legacy Challenge post MH2.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Everyone freaked out about Urza Saga, best card in the format. Everyone like wildly overcorrected. Discovered Meltdown. Discovered that terrible green card, Seeds of Innocence.
Yep. Seeds of Innocence. Yep.
A bunch of other stuff. And it wasn't interesting to play Saga in D&T because D&T is not a very good Saga deck. It's just a powerful card you could that in a deck that can afford to play those flex lands. And then Saga Hate kind of dropped off a little bit. D&T kind of got away with playing a more powerful card sometimes, but I think the meta has settled, especially with like the rise of Painter and other similar artifact-based decks. We've settled into a format where Saga is a known and powerful quantity enough that a lot of these red decks will be bringing downs. and stuff, and you don't want to get hit by that hate as D&T when you can afford to just kind of go around it instead.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that like most decks that have Meltdown are probably bringing it against you regardless of which build you are, because usually they have the cards to cut, and most of those decks also can't really afford to let you keep an Aether Vial, and they need just as many answers for it as they can get.
Yeah.
I think a similar thing for like Force of Vigors. Force of Vigor basically in every green deck. And I remember the few leagues I did play with Saga D&T, I had 2 matches where I played like a turn 2 Saga after playing like an Aether Vial, and I got Force of Vigored, and I just died. I just
Oh
exploded.
yeah.
Yeah, I exploded in place. There was nothing for me to do.
Oh, I also misread Luinil's comment about Ephemerate, not in Saga. Play Ephemerate to overload dress without playing Saga. In which case, yeah, I think I mentioned that part too a little bit. Is that like I don't see a ton of dress downs anymore, nor do I. Nor am I very scared of the dress down matchups. It's mostly
Yeah,
just control.
that's mostly how I feel. I know that like I think I remember you making the point, Luminal, that like one reason you liked Saga at points was that like sure Saga isn't good against Dress Down, but Dress Down as a whole is good against most of the things that D&T are doing. So it was nice to have more avenues with which to force those Dress Downs out of their deck. And I think that's a totally fair argument. I have personally had the experience of not being too worried about it. I haven't had that much difficulty playing through Dress Downs. Um, and I don't think I would reevaluate that unless the number of dress downs increases dramatically. And I suspect that starting off, it's probably going to be the exact opposite, given that if there was a reason to play dress down, it was because of the initiative decks.
You know what else is good against dress down is a Trailblazer's Torch.
Ooh,
Notable non-creature with
not
immunity.
very true.
Also, I guess maybe notable in the going in future is also good against Torpor, right? Torpor's only creatures.
Yes, Torpor Orb is only creatures.
So yeah, if you can like Stoneforge up your Trailblazers Torch before they get a Torpor down, that's a plan that doesn't actually suck.
It's kind of cool, honestly. Um, and I think um, one other thing that's just like worth noting about other directions we could take in the future is I mentioned before I played Seasoned Dungeoneer in TNT before. Um, I did honestly like it quite a bit, even during the initiative meta. Um, I think it's probably the best 4-drop creature that you can't tutor for that you could play. Particularly because, like, again, the initiative is really good against a select few decks. It's one of the only 4-drops that you can play that's actually weirdly aggressive because it's just unblockable. So you can close out games with it in a way that like most of the other 4-drops can't. I think it would take a pretty specific meta for you to want to play Dungeoneer as your source of initiative over like a Trailblazer's Torch. I doubt you want both of those. But I think that meta could exist, although I wouldn't start by assuming that it is.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's definitely one of the least embarrassing value unrecruitable 4-drops that you can play for a lot of the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah. Death Not Oz, it certainly should be white, but it isn't because Watsi hates us.
I mean, I don't think you'd play in D&T.
No,
Eh,
I don't think
it's
you
like
would, but I think it's just like too many non synergies. But like,
you could maybe get away with it as like a Saga / Doomsday hate card, right?
uh, yeah, you could.
You could maybe get like convince yourself that like it's archive trap, but it has text versus Saga decks instead of being completely worthless.
No, I think that's actually pretty fair. Certainly a sideboard card, but I could see that actually. Now that you mention it, but
But
unfortunately, that's not the reality we live in because nothing is ever fair. So, um, and I think you kind of already touched on pretty much the last thing I wanted to mention, which is like kind of like the flex land conundrum. You know, I'm on Field of Ruin. You're playing Ghost Quarters. Some people are playing Cavern of Souls. Um, Ultimately, I think whatever flex land you want to play in these two slots is probably fine, as long as you have made an informed choice about which one you want to play. I think there's probably not that many wrong answers. Like I don't think you probably shouldn't play Horizon land or Canopy lands because you don't want your mana to deal damage to you and you mostly want your lands to stay in play. You probably don't want flagstones unless you're also playing Cataclysm. But I think like other than that, it's kind of hard to go wrong between Field of Ruin, Ghost Quarter Cavern, or even just more planes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure which one is the best. I'm not really convinced by any of them. I do think if you're playing Ghost Quarter, especially, you should try to be very cognizant of basic lands in a lot of decks, so you don't just randomly fire it off. I think if people are going to end up copying my list at all and playing Ghost Quarters, I'm probably actively doing them a disservice, much like I did with Peacekeeper, in which people will use them at the wrong times and lose games because of it.
It wouldn't be you coming back to D&T if you didn't sabotage people's games for them, right?
What about snow-covered plains? What about snow-covered plains?
I'm just saying that I don't have these on Moto for a reason. I am sending a message. If you want to play the split, go ahead. If you want to play them as your two flex lands, you can also go ahead. Just don't tell me that I'm wrong for not splitting. That's all I want.
Yes, all I want is for people to just shut up about it.
Yeah.
Do it if you want. No one cares.
Exactly. All right, let's try. Okay. Cathedral of Sarah. I'll look at a couple of these.
It's got to ETB tapped, right?
All right. Quantity 0.
Sounds like it taps for white.
Hello?
It's too bad to be on MTGO.
Oh,
and also
no.
doesn't tap mana. Excellent.
Oh, boy.
Wait, is it actually not on MTGO? There's no shot, right? I have Scribe all open. Cathedral.
I'm like so stun locked that this search is just like giving me nothing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's that one. That card is sick,
banding.
though.
It's one of the banding lands.
Banding is like one of the most broken mechanics they've ever printed.
Are these not on Moto? It's in Legends. I guess, yeah, some of the older sets, maybe. Huh.
Yeah, that actually makes sense because the original Urborg I don't think is on. Oh no, the original Urborg is. Oh no, because it's the one. No, sorry, Urborg is the one that actually makes mana. Never mind.
There is a cycle of these, right? There's your X Color Legends band with other legends. Right?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm mistaking it with the
there's no
Karaka
banding
cycle.
on Moto. Chad's telling us.
Okay, that makes sense actually. Unholy Citadel, thank you. I won't search for it because it's not on Moto. Or, well, is it? I'll do this.
Adventurer's Guild House.
Yes, Adventurer's Guild House. Yeah,
they
there we go.
Deleted all the banning cards from Moto.
Yeah, bummer. I get it though. Banding is broken.
Literally, like it just wouldn't function.
It would function. It's just that what banding says is you win every combat, and it's not close.
Thalia banding with Gitrog.
Or sorry, oh right, you only win defensive combats, right. You just can't be attacked into. That's what it is. Yeah. All right. Well, I think. Do you have? Are there any things that we didn't cover that you want to mention as part of this section of the stream?
I don't think so. I set aside a little bit of planning time to do a Q&A, but we could also probably do that like as we go into matches.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a quick break before we go into the matches.
Perfect time for a Q&A.
So I will let people go ahead, shoot your questions at xJCloud while I'm gone for a bit. Obviously, we'll keep answering questions throughout the stream as they come in, but I will at least be gone for, probably 10-ish minutes for a little bit. So
I'll keep chat company.
Thank you very much. I'll be back in a little bit.
What was the Blue Red Delver summary? It was mostly that Blue Red Delver doesn't actually change a lot. They're gonna cut 4 EIs and put in 4 cards seemingly at random. Their D&T matchup will get worse because they're no longer really capable of the same grind. And we're pretty happy about that. But that's like I expect the Delver matchup to get a little bit better. We did kind of do I guess we were pretty much answering questions kind of throughout, but if anyone has any other questions. Delver's based not tier 0, just tier 1. I mean, that's kind of what happens every time Delver gets a card banned, right? Is that it drops from like the best deck into the format to still probably the best deck in the format, but just a little bit worse. And then it gets a new broken card, and then it goes back to being the best deck in the format by far. Delver, I think, is still probably pretty safely the best deck in the format. I wouldn't be surprised to see it at the top again in 2 weeks. Would I change anything for paper? No. I don't see a huge difference in like paper versus like challenge metas in terms of that sort of stuff. You do kind of run into more random bullshit and a little bit less like expected meta, but not to an extent that I don't think I would care that much. Why does the Oracle text for banding say blocking or blocked if you can only band and attack? I don't fucking know what banding works. Yeah, Lord of the Rings will print something. So I've heard that some modern players, I think I saw a clip on Reddit today about like Spike apparently, and Spike and Canister I think actually got contacted by WotC or something to like look at some cards presumably and say, hey, is this card too broken for modern, stuff like that. So it did seem like they were actually reaching out to good players in modern about cards from the Lord of the Rings set, and it does seem like these people are of the opinion that the Lord of the Rings set is not super. It's not Modern Horizons 3. It's just goofy Lord of the Rings cards for people that want to play those things. Which naturally means that we'll get some stupid busted engine in Legacy because no one accounts for that format. Why is the Lord of the Rings set modern legal? Because they want more money. And modern is the oldest legal set that they care about. They probably want to like drive hype and like set up a modern RC like right on the heels of the Lord of the Rings set coming out or something. Patrick Sullivan, Petragon, Sam Black had to remind them Fast Circles. Yeah, I loved Sam Black's article about MH2 where he was like, they wanted to put like Doomsday as like the buy a box promo or something for MH2, and he was like, "Do you want me to build you a Doomsday Thassa's Oracle deck list in Modern?" And they were like, "All right, well we'll cut it. We'll cut Doomsday from MH2." Yeah, Sam Black also kept them from putting Caracas into Modern. Yeah, so the issue with Commander Legends is that it's a multiplayer focused set, and I don't know if Lord of the Rings set it will be designed. Obviously, like every set is designed with Commander in mind, but I don't know if it will specifically have multiplayer mechanics. Generally, multiplayer mechanics are what ends up getting broken in other formats. Monarch, see Initiative, see that's probably it because those are some of the only multiplayer mechanics. But those are a little bit easier to fuck up. Yeah, True Name Nemesis, I guess, is kind of a multiplayer mechanic in some ways. I really wish that they had printed nerfed. I was hoping that they would print nerfed Caracas into Modern, so we could play more than 4 copies of Caracas in Legacy D&T. I really wanted them to print Caracas that was like ETB, like enters untapped, taps for white, and you pay like white and tap it, and it bounces only your legendary creatures or something. That'd probably be really fucked up in Modern with all the fucking Omnaths and whatever. I'm not a Modern player, but it'd probably be pretty stupid. But I just wanted to play more than 4 Caracases in my deck. Have I really don't think Caracas should target your opponent's stuff. I think that's really the stupid thing about it. The fact that it bounces your opponent's shit. Akalith is upstairs with you talking about how I'm dumb and he's just gonna leave the stream. Nice. I'm gonna take over the stream now, guys. It is my stream. I own twitch.tv/Akalith, as well as twitch.tv/xJCloud. This is my second channel now. I'll take control as soon as I hack into Akalith's IP and start actually controlling his moto. The over under, yes, for me not knowing it. I would sit here and talk with chat for like half an hour before I was like, I feel like Akalith should maybe be coming back. I would straight up just sit here hanging out with chat. It's even funnier because chat's just looking at this like blank, this like unmoving screen. It's just my voice. You arrived just in time, Chileth. We were doing a state of the noodle D&T address for the first half of the stream. We haven't done any magic yet. We're playing some league. So playing a league after Akalith is done with his break. Remote into his laptop. Or remote into his desktop, easy. I don't even fucking know where Akalith lives. Cat here. You guys can't even see dog? Some xJCloud stream, huh? I have no idea what his promise to you is, Childish, so I can't answer that question. Didn't he already board in Yorion once? Against like some like win conless control deck and then like still win? It was like they had they like Scepter Chant locked him, and then he got out of Scepter Chant lock and killed him or something. He was gonna time out the Scepter Chant